Hey there, Kevin. I was watching a clip of Andrew Wilson and Destiny debating over women in the workforce. And I thought they both did a pretty bad job of putting forward their arguments. But as I was going through their arguments, I came across an argument that I thought was pretty interesting. So now let's give a brief summary of some of the back and forth that they had. Not everything, because some of the stuff I didn't think was too relevant. So, Andrew says that women should be phased out of the workforce and that it causes men's salaries to increase. And Destiny says, well, women entering the workforce is a leading indicator of prosperity for a nation. And Andrew says, well, a decrease in supply leads to an increase in prices. And a decrease in workers would cause an increase in salary. That's what he's saying. So Destiny asks, well, do you think that getting rid of half the population would be good for the economy? And Andrew says, well, that's not what I was saying, because he was talking about phasing out women from the workforce. He says, but if you got rid of half the population, wages would increase. Now, I'll pause it here. So, when Andrew is protesting that that's not his argument of getting rid of half the population, or it's not equivalent to his argument, I assume that he would be saying that getting rid of half the population would be bad for the economy. Now, it could be that he's just talking about that it would be sudden, since he emphasized it should be a phase out. But the more obvious problem would be what Destiny wasn't really conveying properly, which is that productivity would decrease. And I'll give an example. You just consider two people, married couple. They each produce 100 units, and each make $100,000 in wages. And they each consume 100 units using those wages. Now, you would actually be consuming less, but it was keeping this simple. Now, this is the zero, and actually negative, but zero, again for simplicity, savings rate that Destiny had mentioned earlier. So now, let's say, well, the wife stops working because women are moving out of the workforce, so there's no replacement for the wife. Well, the argument is that the husband could demand more wages. Let's say he gets the entirety of the wife's wages. Well, he's not producing anymore, so there's only 100 products produced instead of the 200 when they were both working. The family has the same amount of wages, 200,000. And they still want to consume 200 units. But now there aren't 200 units. There's only 100 because only 100 are being produced. So now you have to run the supply and demand graph for the production. In other words, that there's inflation. This cancels out the increased wages. In fact, really, in this case, more than canceling out the increased wages. Because it's not like the 100 products would cost 100,000. It probably costs all 200,000. Because that's the cost of making the 100 products. Now, that was in a scenario where it was the man and the woman were completely equal. But Someone might make the argument that men are more productive than women, but aren't paid commensurate with that excess production. Whether or not that's true, someone could be making that argument, but it doesn't help them. You're still less prosperous than you would have been if both the husband and wife were working. Now, again, this is all really simplified, and I could absolutely believe that there's additional factors that would make this not work quite this simply. But there was really no discussion at all about that. For example, I mean, if the women are making the men less productive for whatever reason, then you could have enough of an imbalance. I think that's unlikely, especially, but that's just one of the examples of something that could make this example not really be representative. Now, the really odd thing is that Andrew effectively makes exactly the same point later on. Another lady brings up the question of why China doesn't have only men work. They're supposed to be better. And he says, well, that's because they got a labor shortage. There aren't enough people to support the other generations that aren't working because they have their one-child policy. He said, really, it's a global problem, really a Western problem. But and based on the clip, no one really gets a chance to confront him on that. He's sort of contradicted himself. But as I was thinking, I know that Andrew makes his argument, or it seems like he's making the argument, that women being in the workforce causes them to have less children. Because I know he said something to the effect of that women are spending their best reproductive years working rather than having children. And if you think along those lines, then you can kind of think of women being in the workforce as like taking out a loan. Yeah, you get more productivity at the start. It's like taking out a loan. You can spend a bunch of money at the start. But as time goes on, those women are having less children. Having less children means that there are fewer people in the workforce. And so ultimately you end up with that half the population, getting rid of half the population because you have half the population that you would have had if women weren't in the workforce. Just like a loan, you got to pay it back with interest. Now this was the strange thing. I don't know if Andrew was saying this descriptively or prescriptively. I would assume descriptively. But really, China can't have the women working if it's the case that they're going to be having less children, because that labor shortage is never going to get fixed. They're just going to have less and less and less people, more and more and more people that are going to have to support that aren't working, until the society completely collapses and there's nobody left. Now, of course, you could force the women to have children. That's a possibility. I don't know what they're doing. But really the thing is you got to bite the bullet and say, well, we just can't support. If it's true that we got a labor shortage, we just can't do it. because having women in the workforce is only going to make the problem worse. It's like, if you're in a bunch of debt, have trouble paying it back. You can't just keep on taking on more debt if there's never going to be a way to pay it back. You just got to bite the bullet and go bankrupt. Or seriously cut back on your spending or something. You can't just keep on living like you are underwater.